The first thing anyone noticed was the lights, blue, white, flashing hard against the wet London pavement, cutting through the night like something urgent had just broken the rhythm of the city. Cars slowed, but didn't stop. People turned, but didn't step forward. Because in London, something had to be extreme before it became your problem. And right now, it wasn't extreme enough. A small crowd had formed near the edge of the sidewalk, just outside a quiet cafe that was already closing for the night. No one spoke loudly. No one rushed in. They stood at a distance, watching, measuring, deciding how involved they were willing to be. In the middle of it all, on the cold ground, was a man, Samuel. He lay on his side, motionless, except for the faint rise and fall of his chest. His jacket, thin, worn, barely protected him from the damp cold seeping through the pavement. One of his hands was still loosely gripping a piece of cardboard. It had slipped halfway out of his fingers, but the words were still visible. A paramedic knelt beside him, checking his pulse. Another opened a medical bag with quick, practiced movements. "Pulse is weak," one of them said under his breath. "Let's move. Now." Still, the crowd didn't move closer. They watched, some with concern, some with curiosity, most with distance, because getting too close meant responsibility. And responsibility was something people avoided unless it was theirs. "Men, move." The voice cut through the air, firm and controlled, not loud, but certain. Heads turned. A man stepped forward, pushing through the edge of the crowd, not aggressively, but with purpose. His coat was dark, tailored, the kind that didn't belong in this part of the street at this hour. His shoes were polished, his posture straight. "Gabriel?" He didn't hesitate, didn't slow down, didn't ask permission. He moved past the onlookers, as if the invisible line they had drawn didn't exist for him. "Excuse me, move." Someone shifted. Another stepped aside. Within seconds, he was at the center, right beside Samuel. For a brief moment, Gabriel didn't speak. He just looked, really looked, not at a stranger, not at a homeless man, but at a face he recognized, and something in his expression changed. Not shock, not confusion, something deeper, something personal. "What happened?" Gabriel asked, his voice steady but tighter now. "Collapsed," one of the paramedics replied quickly. "Looks like exhaustion. Maybe more. We're stabilizing him before transport." Gabriel nodded once, absorbing it. Then his eyes dropped to the cardboard still near Samuel's hand. He bent slightly, picking it up. "Read it." Just 4 words, but they lingered longer than they should have. Gabriel exhaled slowly, almost like that sentence carried more weight than the entire situation around him. "Has he said anything?" Gabriel asked. "No. Unresponsive when we got here," the paramedic answered. Another paramedic adjusted Samuel's position, carefully lifting his head. "Stay with us, all right?" "Stay with me." No response. The city noise continued around them. Cars passing, distant voices, the faint hum of life moving forward as if nothing here required pause. But for Gabriel, everything had paused. He stepped closer, lowering himself slightly, not caring about the wet ground, not caring about who was watching. "Samuel." He said the name quietly, but clearly. No reaction. Gabriel leaned in just a bit more. "Hey, you said tomorrow." Still nothing. For the first time, there was a crack in his composure. Small, but real. The paramedics worked faster now. "All right, we're moving him," one said. "Let's get him on the stretcher." They lifted Samuel carefully, securing him in place with practiced efficiency. The crowd shifted again, creating space, not out of urgency, but because movement required adjustment. Gabriel stood, stepping back just enough to give them room, but not enough to disconnect. His eyes never left Samuel. As they began wheeling the stretcher toward the ambulance, one of the paramedics glanced at Gabriel. "You family?" A pause, just a fraction of a second, but it mattered. Gabriel didn't answer immediately, because the truth wasn't simple. "Not tonight, not anymore." "No," he said finally. Then, after a beat, "But I'm not leaving." The paramedic gave a short nod, already turning back to the task. "All right. Then keep up." The ambulance doors opened, lights still flashing. Samuel was lifted inside. Equipment moved quickly, voices sharpened. "4 ready. Monitor on. Let's go. Gabriel stood just outside for a second. Just 1 second, looking in at the man who, just days ago, had been sitting on a sidewalk, talking like life hadn't broken him. And now, Sir, are you coming or not? One of the paramedics called out. Gabriel didn't hesitate again. He stepped forward, climbing into the ambulance. The doors slammed shut behind him, and just like that, the city moved on. The crowd dispersed. The cafe lights turned off. Cars passed like nothing had happened, because in London, something only mattered for as long as it was in front of you. The ambulance pulled away from the curb, siren cutting through the night now. Louder, sharper, impossible to ignore. Inside, everything felt tighter, closer, more real. Gabriel sat beside the stretcher, one hand gripping the edge of his seat. Not out of fear, but out of control, or the lack of it. He looked at Samuel again, paler now, still, too still, and for the first time in a long time, Gabriel felt something he wasn't used to feeling. Not pressure, not expectation, not responsibility, something else, something quieter, but heavier. Concern, real concern, not for a deal, not for a decision, but for a person. The paramedic adjusted something near Samuel's arm. "We've got a response," he said. "Stay with us." Gabriel leaned slightly forward, not saying anything, just watching, waiting, because suddenly, tomorrow didn't feel guaranteed anymore. The siren faded. Not completely, but enough that it no longer dominated the moment. Now it was just sound in the background. Inside the hospital, everything felt different, controlled, measured, quiet in a way that didn't mean peace, but procedure. Samuel lay on the bed, connected to machines that monitored what his body was struggling to keep steady on its own. A faint rhythm echoed from one of them, steady but fragile. Gabriel stood near the doorway at first, still, watching, as if stepping too close might somehow change the reality of what he was seeing. A nurse adjusted something on the monitor, then glanced briefly at Gabriel. "He's stable," she said, "but he's exhausted, malnourished. It's been building for a while." Gabriel nodded once. No questions, no dramatic reaction, just quiet understanding, because somehow that made sense. Samuel didn't complain. He didn't ask. He didn't show weakness. He carried everything lightly, even when it wasn't. And now, his body had made the decision for him. Rest, whether he wanted it or not. The nurse finished and stepped out. The room settled into stillness, just the low hum of machines, and two men. One unconscious, one thinking more than he had in months. Gabriel moved closer this time, slowly, deliberately. He pulled a chair beside the bed and sat down, his eyes fixed on Samuel's face. Different now, not because Samuel had changed, but because the context had. Out there, Samuel was the one who spoke lightly about life. Here, he looked like someone who had been carrying too much for too long. Gabriel leaned back slightly, exhaling through his nose. Then, after a moment, "You didn't show up today." His voice was calm, almost casual, but there was something underneath it, something that didn't belong to a stranger. Silence. The machines continued their quiet rhythm. Gabriel looked down briefly, then back at Samuel. "You said tomorrow." Another pause. Then, a faint shift. Small, but real. Samuel's fingers twitched slightly against the sheet. Gabriel leaned forward, not urgently, but attentively. "Samuel?" A slow breath, then another. And then Samuel's eyes opened. Not fully, not sharply, but enough. His gaze was unfocused at first, adjusting to the light, to the space, to the unfamiliar ceiling above him. For a second, confusion passed across his face. Then recognition, not of the room, but of the voice. He turned his head slightly, saw Gabriel, and despite everything, despite the hospital, despite the weakness, a faint smile appeared. "Guess I missed coffee," Samuel said, his voice dry and barely above a whisper. Gabriel let out a quiet breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "Yeah," he replied. "You're late?" Samuel blinked slowly, taking in his surroundings. "Didn't plan that," he murmured. "I figured." A brief silence settled between them again, but this one felt different, not empty, not distant, familiar. Samuel swallowed slightly, his voice still weak. "You waited?" Gabriel didn't answer immediately, because the truth wasn't simple. He hadn't just waited, he had come back. expected to see him, noticed his absence. And now, he was here. "Yes," Gabriel said finally. Samuel's smile grew just a little. "Told you," he whispered. "I'd try again tomorrow." Gabriel shook his head slightly. "You don't get to make promises like that and disappear." Samuel let out a weak breath that might have been a laugh. "Didn't disappear. Just took a break." Gabriel leaned forward, resting his forearms lightly on his knees. For a moment he studied Samuel again. Then his tone shifted. Not dramatically, but enough to matter. "Samuel, there's something I need to tell you." Samuel looked at him. Still calm, still oddly relaxed, considering everything. "If it's about the coffee," Samuel said quietly, "I still prefer the cheap one." Gabriel almost smiled, but this time he didn't follow the joke, because this wasn't that kind of moment. "It's not about the coffee." A pause. Samuel's expression didn't change much, but his attention sharpened slightly. Gabriel held his gaze, steady, direct. "I'm not just some guy you met on the street." Silence filled the space between them, not tense, but expectant. Samuel blinked once, still watching him, still waiting. Gabriel continued. "I run a company." A small pause. Then, "I'm a CEO." No dramatic music, no reaction from the room. Just that sentence, landing quietly. Samuel stared at him for a second, then another, and then he let out a soft, tired laugh. "Of course he did." "Of course you are," Samuel said, his voice still weak but amused. "You walk too fast." Gabriel exhaled lightly, shaking his head. "That's your takeaway?" Samuel shifted slightly on the bed. "That, and the coat," he added. "Definitely not from my side of the city." Gabriel looked down briefly at his coat, then back at Samuel. For the first time since entering the hospital, there was something lighter in the room. But it didn't last long, because Gabriel wasn't done. His expression settled again, serious, grounded. "Samuel," he said quietly, "you helped me." That got Samuel's attention, more than the title ever could. His eyes focused more clearly now. "What do you mean?" Gabriel leaned back slightly, choosing his words carefully. "You didn't ask me for anything," he said. "You didn't complain. You didn't act like your situation defined you." A pause. "You just showed up." Samuel watched him silently. "You talked like things could still change," Gabriel continued. "Like tomorrow mattered." Another pause. "And I needed that." The room felt different again. Not heavy, not tense, but honest. Samuel's expression softened slightly. "You looked like you had things figured out," he said quietly. Gabriel gave a small, almost humorless smile. "That's what it looks like from the outside." Samuel studied him for a moment, then nodded faintly. "Yeah," he murmured. "I know that look." Silence again, but this one didn't need filling, because something had already shifted. Not because of money, not because of status, but because of understanding. Two different lives, meeting in the same truth, and that truth was simple. Having everything didn't always mean feeling complete. Welcome back to Mr. George Stories, where life's most powerful lessons come wrapped in unforgettable tales. If you're new to this family, thank you for joining us. Please hit the subscribe button because it helps us share stories like this on YouTube. Have you ever met someone who had nothing, but somehow gave you something you didn't even know you needed? Or found yourself in a place where everything looked right, but nothing felt right? Stay with me, because this story is just getting started. Have you ever sat in a room full of people and still felt alone? Not physically alone, not abandoned, but disconnected, like you were present, but not really there. Or maybe you've experienced the opposite. A moment with someone who had nothing to offer you on paper. No status, no advantage, no reason to matter in your life. And yet, that moment stayed with you longer than anything money could buy. Think about that, because most people spend their lives chasing what looks complete, without ever asking if it actually feels complete. And that's where this story begins. Not with wealth, not with success, but with a quiet imbalance that no one else could see. Gabriel had everything people respected. The kind of life that made others nod in approval without asking questions. The kind of life that looked finished. But what no one saw was how carefully controlled everything had become. Every decision, every conversation, every expectation. Even his emotions had boundaries, measured, contained, appropriate. And over time, that kind of control doesn't just organize your life, it limits it. Because when everything is managed, nothing is truly felt. Gabriel didn't notice it all at once. It wasn't sudden. It didn't announce itself. It happened slowly, quietly, in moments that seemed normal on the surface, but left something missing underneath. Dinners that felt routine instead of meaningful. Conversations that stayed safe instead of honest. Days that passed efficiently, but without impact. And the strangest part, no one around him questioned it. Because from the outside, it looked exactly like success. A respected position, a structured life, a marriage that appeared stable, everything in place, everything correct. But correctness isn't the same as connection. And deep down, Gabriel was starting to feel that difference. Not in a dramatic way, not in a way that demanded immediate change, but in a quiet, persistent way that didn't go away. The kind that follows you even when everything else seems fine. And then he met Samuel, not in a meeting, not through a connection, not through any system that usually brought people into his life, but by chance. On a street most people walked past without noticing, and that's what made it different. Because Samuel didn't fit into Gabriel's world. He didn't belong to the same conversations, the same expectations, the same structure. Samuel existed outside of all of that, and somehow that made him clearer. There was no performance, no pressure to appear a certain way, no need to prove anything, just presence and honesty. Even in the middle of struggle, Samuel didn't pretend his situation was easy, but he didn't let it define how he showed up either. And that's rare, because most people, when life becomes difficult, either hide it or let it consume them. Samuel did neither. He acknowledged it, then chose to keep moving, one day at a time, one attempt at a time. 4 words, simple but powerful, because they weren't about success. They were about persistence. And that's what caught Gabriel's attention. Not the situation, but the mindset. Because in a world where people had everything and still complained, Samuel had almost nothing and still believed. Now ask yourself this. What weighs more, having nothing and still trying, or having everything and still feeling stuck? That question is where everything begins to shift, because it forces you to look beyond appearances, beyond assumptions, beyond what people show on the surface. And when you do that, you start to see things differently. You start to notice that some of the strongest people are the ones no one pays attention to, and some of the most successful people are the ones quietly searching for something they can't explain. Gabriel didn't go out that night looking for answers. He didn't expect anything to change. But sometimes, the moment that changes your perspective is the one you didn't plan for. And sometimes, the person who shifts your thinking is the one the world overlooks. So here's the real question. What happens when those two people meet? When someone who has built everything encounters someone who has lost almost everything, but still holds onto something more valuable? That's where this story moves forward. Not just as an encounter, but as a connection. And not just as a connection, but as a turning point. Because what started as a simple conversation is about to become something neither of them expected. And before we go deeper, if you've ever experienced a moment like this, or if you believe people can still change each other's lives in the most unexpected ways, take a second right now, like this video, and drop a comment saying story. Because the more engagement this gets, the more stories like this reach people who need them. Now, let's continue, because Gabriel is about to make a decision that will quietly change everything. The next evening didn't look unusual, and that was the problem. Gabriel stepped out of the car just as the driver pulled away smoothly from the curb. The building behind him stood tall and polished, its glass reflecting the last traces of daylight over the Thames. Inside, everything had gone exactly as planned. Meetings, decisions, numbers, agreements, controlled conversations with controlled outcomes. By every standard that mattered in his world, it had been a successful day. But as Gabriel adjusted his coat and walked toward the entrance of his home, there was no sense of satisfaction following him in, just silence. The kind that didn't come from the environment, but from within. The door opened quietly, as he stepped inside. Warm lighting, clean space, everything in its place. It looked like a home that worked, but it didn't feel like one that lived. Gabriel? Anne's voice came from the dining area, soft, measured, familiar. "I'm here," he replied. He walked in, loosening his collar slightly as he approached the table. Dinner was already set. 2 plates, 2 glasses, everything arranged neatly, almost too neatly. Anne sat across from his usual seat, her posture straight, her expression calm in a way that didn't reveal much. She looked exactly how she always did. Composed, elegant, put together. "Long day?" she asked. Gabriel pulled his chair out and sat down. "The usual," he said. A simple answer. Too simple. But neither of them challenged it. Anne nodded slightly, picking up her fork. "That's good," she said. "You had that board discussion today, right?" "Yes." "And?" "It went well." Another pause. Not uncomfortable, but not connected either. Just space. They began eating, quietly, the only sounds coming from the soft clink of cutlery against the plates. This wasn't new. This had become normal. Conversations reduced to updates. Responses reduced to confirmations. No tension, no conflict, but also no depth. After a few moments, Anne spoke again. "I went to that gallery opening this afternoon," she said. "The one I mentioned last week." Gabriel nodded slightly, taking a sip of water. "How was it?" "It was good," she replied. "A lot of people. Good turnout." "That's great." She studied him for a brief second, not long enough to be obvious, but long enough to notice something. "You could have come," she added. Gabriel glanced up. "You know how those things are for me." Anne gave a small nod. "Yes," she said, "I do." Her tone wasn't sharp, it wasn't confrontational, but there was something in it, something subtle, something that suggested the sentence meant more than it said. Gabriel noticed it, but didn't address it. Instead, he returned his attention to his plate, because that was easier, and that was exactly the issue. Anne set her fork down gently. "Do you ever feel like we've gotten very good at this?" she asked. Gabriel paused, looked up again. "At what?" She gestured lightly between them. She said, "Dinner. Conversations. Routine." Gabriel leaned back slightly in his chair. "I thought that was a good thing," he replied. "It is," Anne said quickly. "It's stable. It works." A small pause. Then, "But does it feel like anything?" That question didn't land loudly, but it landed clearly. Gabriel didn't answer immediately. Not because he didn't hear it, but because he did, and he understood what it was really asking. Anne held his gaze, waiting, not demanding, just present. Gabriel exhaled slowly. "I think," he started, then stopped, because the honest answer wasn't as simple as the ones they were used to giving each other, and honesty wasn't something they practiced often anymore. Anne watched him carefully. "You don't have to give the right answer," she said quietly. "Just give the real one." That shifted something, not dramatically, but enough. Gabriel leaned forward slightly, resting his hands together. "It feels," he paused again, searching, "efficient." Anne blinked once, then gave a small, almost understanding nod. "Efficient," she repeated, not disappointed, not surprised, just aware. "Yes," Gabriel added. "We don't argue. We don't have problems. Everything runs smoothly." Anne looked down briefly at the table, then back at him. "Do you think that's the same as being happy?" she asked. Another pause, this one longer. He could have said yes. That would have been the easy answer, the safe one, the expected one. But something about that question didn't allow for easy answers. Gabriel shook his head slightly. "I don't know," he admitted, and that was the most honest thing he had said all evening. Anne leaned back in her chair, folding her arms lightly. "I've been feeling something similar," she said. Gabriel looked at her again, more attentive now. "What do you mean?" She hesitated for a brief moment, not because she didn't want to speak, but because she wanted to say it correctly. "Like I'm living a version of my life that looks right," she explained, "but doesn't feel complete." Gabriel listened, really listened this time, not as a response, but as understanding. Anne continued, "I go to events. I meet people. I say the right things. I wear the right things, and everyone assumes I'm exactly where I want to be." A small pause. Then, "But sometimes I feel like I'm just maintaining something, instead of actually living it." The room felt different now, not tense, but open and unfamiliar in a way that mattered. Because this kind of conversation hadn't happened in a long time. Gabriel sat back slightly, processing her words, then nodded. "I understand that," he said quietly. Anne looked at him again. "You do?" "Yes." A pause. Then Gabriel added, "I just didn't realize you felt it too." Anne gave a faint smile. "Maybe we've both been too busy being fine." Had landed, because it was true. They weren't broken. They weren't unhappy in a way that caused conflict. But they weren't connected either. And that space in between was starting to matter. The room fell quiet again. But this time, it wasn't empty. It was reflective. Gabriel glanced down briefly, then back at Anne. "There's something else," he said. Anne raised an eyebrow slightly. "What?" Gabriel hesitated, not out of fear, but because he wasn't used to explaining things that didn't have clear definitions. "I met someone," he said. Anne's expression didn't change immediately, but her attention sharpened. "Someone?" She repeated. "Yes." A small pause. "Then, not like that," Gabriel added quickly. Anne held his gaze, waiting. "Then, what do you mean?" she asked. Gabriel leaned back slightly, thinking. "I don't know how to explain it yet," he admitted, "but it made me think." Anne studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "About what?" Gabriel looked down briefly, then back up. "About what matters," he said. The room went quiet again, but this time, it felt like something had started, not resolved, not fixed, but open. And sometimes, that's where change begins. Later that night, the house was quiet again, but not in the same way. Something had shifted at the dinner table. Nothing dramatic. No arguments, no raised voices, just honesty. Uncomfortable, unfamiliar honesty that lingered in the air even after the conversation ended. Gabriel stood near the window in the living room, looking out over the city. Lights stretched endlessly across the skyline, each one representing movement, decisions, lives unfolding in ways no one else could fully see. From the outside, it all looked alive, full, connected, but standing there, looking at it from a distance, it didn't feel that way, not to him. Behind him, the room remained untouched, everything still in place, everything still controlled, but for the first time in a long while, Gabriel didn't want to stay inside it. He reached for his coat. No announcement, no explanation, just a quiet decision. "I'm stepping out," he said as he moved toward the door. Anne looked up from where she sat, her expression calm but observant. "At this hour?" she asked. Gabriel paused briefly. "Yeah," he replied. "I just need some air." Anne held his gaze for a second longer, then nodded. "Okay." No questions, no assumptions, just acceptance. And somehow, that made the moment feel even more real. Gabriel stepped outside, closing the door behind him. The air was cooler now, sharper. It didn't comfort him, but it woke him up. For a second, he stood still on the pavement. No driver waiting, no destination set, no schedule to follow, just space, and that alone felt unfamiliar. He adjusted his coat slightly, then started walking. At first, his pace was the same as always, purposeful, focused, each step aligned with the next, like it had somewhere to be. But after a few minutes, that rhythm began to fade, because there was nowhere he needed to be. No meeting, no expectation, no outcome tied to where he was going. So slowly, his pace changed, not dramatically, but enough. The city around him continued, as it always did. People passed by without looking twice. Conversations happened in fragments as strangers crossed paths. Cars moved in steady lines, guided by signals and structure. Everything functioned, everything moved forward. And yet, no one seemed to notice anyone else. Gabriel walked past a group standing outside a restaurant, laughing loudly over something he couldn't hear. A couple passed him, walking close, speaking softly to each other. Further ahead, someone stood alone near a bus stop, staring down at their phone, disconnected from everything around them. Different lives, different directions, but all sharing the same space, without ever really connecting. Gabriel noticed it now, more than before, because his mind wasn't occupied. It wasn't filtering the world through purpose or outcome. It was just observing, and what he saw felt distant, not physically, but emotionally. He kept walking, turning corners without thinking, moving through streets that slowly became less polished, less structured. The lights dimmed slightly, the noise softened, and the people changed. Fewer suits, fewer conversations about work, more silence, more stillness. Gabriel didn't stop. Not yet, because something inside him was still searching, not for a place, but for a feeling he couldn't name. Then he slowed, not because he planned to, but because something caught his attention. A small cafe sat at the edge of the street, its lights low, preparing to close for the night. Nothing special about it. Nothing that would normally draw his focus, but just beside it, near a dimly lit corner, someone was sitting, not hidden, not asking for attention, just there. Gabriel's steps slowed further, his eyes fixed briefly on the figure. A man, young, wearing a worn jacket that had clearly seen more seasons than it should have, sitting on the pavement with his back against the wall, legs slightly bent, posture relaxed in a way that didn't match his situation. Beside him, a small cardboard sign rested against his knee. Simple, unpolished, no dramatic message, no attempt to pull sympathy, just words. Gabriel stopped, not close enough to interrupt, but not far enough to ignore, because something about the scene didn't align with what he expected. The man didn't look defeated. He didn't look desperate. He looked calm, and that didn't make sense. Gabriel's eyes dropped briefly to the cardboard, and that's when he read it. 4 words, nothing more, no explanation, no story attached, just a statement. And for some reason, it held his attention longer than it should have. Most signs asked for something, help, money, food. This one didn't. It just declared something, a decision, a mindset. Gabriel took a step closer, then another, until he stood just a few feet away. The man looked up. Their eyes met. No tension, no expectation, just awareness. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke, because sometimes the first impression doesn't come from words. It comes from presence. And in that moment, both of them noticed something different. Gabriel broke the silence first. Rough night? He asked. The question was simple, almost casual, but it carried something underneath it. Curiosity, not pity. The man tilted his head slightly, considering it, then gave a small, easy smile. Not really, he replied. His voice was steady, unforced, just a long chapter. That answer wasn't what Gabriel expected, and it showed, not in an obvious way, but in the slight pause that followed, because most people in that position would answer differently. They would explain, or complain, or ask. But this was something else. Gabriel studied him for a second longer. Then, without realizing it, he stayed. Gabriel didn't usually stop for conversations like this, not because he was indifferent, but because his life rarely allowed for moments without purpose. Every interaction he had, whether in meetings, events, or even casual settings, tended to lead somewhere. An outcome, a decision, a result. But this had no direction, and maybe that's why he didn't leave. He glanced briefly at the cafe beside them, noticing the staff inside beginning to clean up, stacking chairs, preparing to close. Then his attention returned. Long chapter? Gabriel repeated. The man nodded slightly, shifting his posture just enough to sit more comfortably against the wall. Yeah, he said. You ever have one of those days that just keeps going? Gabriel gave a small, almost automatic response. Every day. The man chuckled softly. Yeah, he said. But I think your version and mine might be a little different. Gabriel raised an eyebrow slightly. Probably. A short silence followed. Not awkward, just unhurried. The kind of pause that doesn't demand to be filled immediately. Then Gabriel asked, You always sit here? The man glanced around briefly, then back at him. Not always, he replied. But I like this spot. Why here? The man looked toward the cafe, then at the street. People pass by, he said. Not too fast, not too slow. Enough to notice, not enough to stop. Gabriel considered that. It was a precise observation, one that suggested attention, not just presence. You pay attention to that? Gabriel asked. The man shrugged lightly. Not much else to do sometimes. Gabriel nodded. Fair enough. Then his eyes dropped again to the cardboard sign. Trying again tomorrow, he read out loud. The man followed his gaze, then gave a small smile. Yeah. Gabriel looked back at him. That's it? He asked. No explanation? The man shook his head. People don't really read long stories, he said. You've got about 2 seconds before they decide whether to look away. Gabriel almost smiled. That's accurate. Exactly, the man replied. So I keep it simple. Gabriel studied him for a moment. You don't ask for anything, he pointed out. The man's expression didn't change much. I used to, he admitted. Didn't like how it felt. How did it feel? The man thought about it briefly, like I was waiting for someone else to decide if my day got better. That answer landed differently. Gabriel didn't respond immediately, because it wasn't just about the words. It was about the way they were said. Calm, clear, without bitterness. So now? Gabriel asked. The man gestured lightly toward the sign. Now I just remind myself. I've got another shot tomorrow. Gabriel exhaled quietly. That's a way to look at it. The man tilted his head slightly. Better than thinking it's over, he said. Another pause. Then the man looked at Gabriel more carefully this time. Not judging, just observing. You don't usually walk around here, do you? He asked. Gabriel shook his head. No. Yeah, the man said with a small grin. I figured. What gave it away? The grin widened slightly. You walk too fast. Gabriel blinked once. Caught slightly off guard, I slowed down. Now you did, the man replied. But when you came around that corner, you were moving like you had somewhere important to be. Gabriel let out a quiet breath that almost turned into a laugh. That obvious? Very. Gabriel shook his head slightly. That's just how I walk. The man leaned his head back against the wall. No, he said. That's how people walk when they've got a lot on their mind. That was more accurate than Gabriel expected, and it showed, not in his words, but in the brief silence that followed, because this wasn't just casual conversation anymore. There was awareness in it, observation, understanding. You always analyze people like that? Gabriel asked. The man shrugged. Not really, he said. Just the ones who look like they're thinking too much. Gabriel looked at him for a second longer. Then he laughed. Not politely, not out of habit, but genuinely. And it surprised him, because it came easily, without effort, without calculation. The man noticed. That's better, he said. Gabriel raised an eyebrow. What is that? The man replied. You look less serious when you laugh. Gabriel shook his head slightly, still holding on to the edge of that moment. I'm not that serious. The man gave him a look. You are, he said simply. Another pause. But this one felt lighter, less guarded. Do you do this with everyone? Gabriel asked. Do what? Talk like you already know them. The man smiled faintly. No, he said. Just the ones who stop. Gabriel glanced briefly at the street behind him. People still passing, still moving, still choosing not to stop. Then he looked back. And what makes someone stop? He asked. The man thought about it for a second, then shrugged. Maybe they're tired of walking. That answer stayed longer than expected, because it wasn't just about the moment. It was about something deeper, something Gabriel hadn't fully acknowledged yet. He was tired, not physically, not in a way that required rest, but in a way that came from repetition, from predictability, from living a life that worked, but didn't always feel. And somehow, standing here, talking to someone who had none of what he had, felt easier than most conversations he'd had all week. Gabriel reached into his coat pocket, pulled out some cash, and held it out. The man looked at it, then at Gabriel, not immediately taking it, not refusing either, just considering. I'll take it, he said finally. Gabriel nodded slightly. Then, the man added, but only on one condition. Gabriel paused. What condition? The man held his gaze. You come back tomorrow, he said, and tell me if whatever's on your mind got smaller. Gabriel stared at him for a moment. That wasn't what he expected, at all. And if it didn't? Gabriel asked. The man shrugged lightly. Then we'll make fun of it together. A small silence followed. Then Gabriel smirked, not out of habit, but because he couldn't help it. That's your solution? Works better than overthinking it, the man replied. Gabriel considered that, then nodded once. All right. The man took the cash. All right, he echoed. Gabriel stepped back slightly, not rushing to leave, but not lingering either. For a second, they just looked at each other. Two completely different lives, meeting in the simplest way possible. Then Gabriel turned, started walking again. But this time, his pace was different. Not because he forced it, but because something had shifted. And behind him, the man leaned back against the wall, glancing once more at the cardboard sign beside him. For the first time in a while, that didn't feel like something he was doing alone. The next day didn't start differently. Gabriel woke up at the same time, followed the same routine, wore the same kind of suit, attended the same kind of meetings. Everything moved the way it always did. Structured, efficient, expected. But something underneath that routine had changed. Not visibly, not in a way anyone else would notice. But internally, there was a quiet awareness sitting in the background of everything he did. A thought that returned in between conversations, in the pauses between decisions, in the moments where his attention drifted, even slightly. And for some reason, that mattered. Not because of the agreement itself, but because of how simple it was. No contracts, no expectations, just a decision. And as the day moved forward, Gabriel found himself checking the time more than usual. Not urgently, not impatiently, just aware. Because for once, there was something outside his usual world waiting for him. By the time evening arrived, the city had already started shifting into its nighttime rhythm. Lights coming on, people moving in different directions, energy changing. Gabriel stepped out of his building again. This time, without hesitation, no pause, no second thought, just movement. He didn't call for a car, didn't check his schedule, didn't inform anyone where he was going, because he already knew. And this time, he didn't walk as fast. The same streets, the same corner, but a different pace, more observant, less driven, as if he wasn't trying to get somewhere, just willing to arrive. When he turned the final corner near the cafe, his eyes instinctively moved toward the spot before anything else. And there, Samuel was there. Same place, same wall, same worn jacket. The cardboard sign resting beside him again. But this time, there was something different. Not about Samuel, but about the moment. Because now, it wasn't unexpected. It was intentional. Samuel looked up as Gabriel approached, and without hesitation, he smiled. You came back. Simple, direct, but it carried something. Not surprise, not doubt, just acknowledgement. Gabriel gave a small nod. I said I would. Samuel leaned slightly forward, resting his arms on his knees. So, he asked, did it get smaller? Gabriel exhaled lightly, glancing briefly at the ground before answering. Not really. Samuel nodded once. Good. Gabriel looked at him. Good? Yeah, Samuel said. Means it's still worth thinking about. That answer caught him off guard again. Not because it was complicated, but because it wasn't. Gabriel shook his head slightly. You've got a different way of looking at things. Samuel shrugged. Or maybe I just don't have the luxury of ignoring them. That landed because it was true in a way Gabriel hadn't considered before. Ignoring things was easier when your life allowed space for it, when nothing forced you to confront what you felt. Gabriel glanced toward the cafe. You had coffee yet? He asked. Samuel followed his gaze. Not today. Gabriel nodded once. Wait here. Samuel raised an eyebrow slightly. I don't move much, he said with a faint smile. Gabriel almost smiled back, then turned and walked into the cafe. Inside, the air was warmer, quieter. The staff moved casually, preparing for the evening flow. Gabriel ordered 2 coffees without overthinking it. No hesitation, no analysis, just action. A few minutes later, he stepped back outside, handing one of the cups to Samuel. Samuel looked at it briefly, then at Gabriel. You didn't have to, he said. Gabriel shrugged. I know. Samuel accepted it, carefully, like it mattered. Thanks. They sat there for a moment, both holding coffee, both quiet, but not disconnected, just present. Samuel took a small sip, then nodded slightly. Yeah, this is better than yesterday. Gabriel glanced at his own cup. It's the same place. Samuel shook his head. Yeah, but today I didn't have to wonder if I'd get one. Another simple statement, another perspective. Gabriel leaned back slightly against the wall beside him, not fully sitting, but close enough to not feel separate. You always think like that? Gabriel asked. Samuel looked ahead at the street. Like what? Finding something positive in everything. Samuel thought about it, then shook his head. Not everything, he said. Just the things I can't change right away. Gabriel nodded slowly. That makes sense. Samuel glanced at him. You don't do that? Gabriel let out a quiet breath. Not really. Why not? Gabriel paused, because that question didn't have a quick answer. I guess I'm used to fixing things, he said. Samuel tilted his head slightly. And when you can't? Gabriel didn't respond immediately. Samuel nodded lightly. Exactly. Silence settled again, but it felt comfortable, like neither of them needed to fill it to prove anything. After a moment, Samuel spoke again. So what is it? He asked. Gabriel looked at him. What? The thing on your mind, Samuel clarified. The one that didn't get smaller. Gabriel hesitated, not because he didn't want to answer, but because he wasn't used to explaining things without structure. It's not one thing, he said finally. It's everything working the way it's supposed to, but not feeling like it should. Samuel listened. No interruption, no judgment, just attention. Gabriel continued. I've built something. A career. A life. Everything people aim for. A small pause. But sometimes it feels like I'm just maintaining it. Samuel nodded slowly. Yeah, that was it. No long response. No advice. Just understanding. And somehow, that was enough. Because for the first time, Gabriel didn't feel like he had to explain it perfectly. He just said it. And it was received. Samuel took another sip of his coffee, then glanced at Gabriel again. You ever think maybe it's not about adding more? He asked. Gabriel looked at him. What do you mean? Samuel shrugged lightly. Maybe it's about changing how you see what's already there. Gabriel considered that, not dismissing it, not accepting it immediately either, just thinking. And that was new, because usually his thoughts led to decisions, but this time they just stayed where they were, unresolved, open. Samuel leaned back slightly against the wall again. So, he said casually, same time tomorrow? Gabriel looked at him, then nodded. Yeah, and just like that, it wasn't just a moment anymore. It was a routine. By the third evening, it no longer felt like chance. It felt expected, not in a forced way, not in a routine that demanded structure, but in a quiet understanding that both of them would show up, and they did. Gabriel arrived first this time. He stood near the corner for a moment, hands in his coat pockets, scanning the street, not out of concern, but anticipation. Then, careful, the voice came from behind him. Stand there too long. People will think you're waiting for something important. Gabriel turned. Samuel was walking toward him, adjusting his jacket slightly as he approached. Maybe I am, Gabriel replied. Samuel smirked. Yeah, he said, but you don't look stressed enough for that. Gabriel shook his head slightly. You're late. Samuel raised an eyebrow. Late? He repeated. I live here. You're the visitor. Gabriel almost smiled. Fair point. They settled into their usual spot, the rhythm now familiar. Gabriel handed him a coffee without asking. Samuel took it with a small nod. You're making this a habit, Samuel said. So are you, Gabriel replied. Samuel took a sip, then leaned back slightly against the wall. For a moment they just sat there, watching the street. People passed. Some glanced briefly. Most didn't. Life continued in the background, unchanged. But between them, something had already changed. You ever notice, Samuel said after a while, how people walk past like they got somewhere better to be, but don't look like they're enjoying getting there? Gabriel followed his gaze. I've been noticing that more, he admitted. Samuel nodded. Yeah, he said. It's like everyone's chasing something, but no one really stops to ask if they even want it. Gabriel glanced at him. That's a bold assumption. Samuel shrugged. Maybe, he said. Or maybe it's just easier to keep moving than to question it. Gabriel didn't respond immediately, because that wasn't entirely wrong. After a moment, he shifted slightly, turning his attention more directly to Samuel. You said something the other day, Gabriel began, about your life being a long chapter. Samuel nodded faintly. Yeah, what did you mean by that? Samuel didn't answer right away, not because he was avoiding it, but because he was deciding how much to say. Then he took a small breath. I grew up in a place where everything was loud, he said. Gabriel listened. No interruptions. Not chaotic, Samuel added. Just alive. Music always playing somewhere. People arguing, laughing, talking over each other. Nobody really had much. But nobody acted like they were empty either. A faint smile touched his face. You could walk down the street, and someone would call your name, even if they weren't related to you. Gabriel raised an eyebrow slightly. They knew you like that? Samuel shook his head lightly. Not always, he said, but that's just how it was. Everyone looked out for each other. If you were there, you belonged. That word, belonged, stayed in the air for a moment, because it carried something deeper than just description. Samuel continued. We played football in the streets, he said. Didn't matter if the ground was uneven or the ball was falling apart. We made it work. Gabriel could almost picture it, not because of the details, but because of the way Samuel spoke about it. There were these cookouts too, Samuel added, everyone bringing whatever they could. Music playing, people dancing, kids running around like they owned the place. He let out a small breath. Simple things. Gabriel nodded slowly. But they mattered, he said. Samuel looked at him. Yeah, he replied. They did. A brief silence followed. Not empty, just reflective. Then Gabriel asked, what changed? Samuel's expression shifted slightly. Not dramatically, but enough. Life, he said simply. Gabriel waited. Samuel continued. I had a chance at something, he said. A real opportunity. Not just talk. Something that could have moved me forward. A pause. I didn't handle it right. Gabriel didn't interrupt. Samuel glanced down at his coffee for a moment. Then back up. It wasn't one big mistake, he explained. It was a few small ones. Bad timing. Wrong decisions. Thinking I had more control than I did. Another pause. Things started slipping. Gabriel leaned slightly forward. And no one helped? Samuel shook his head. People tried, he said. But there's only so much anyone can do if you're not in the right place to receive it. That honesty was rare. No blame. No excuses. Just responsibility. Eventually, Samuel continued, everything I thought was stable wasn't. Gabriel understood that feeling more than he expected. And then, he asked. Samuel gave a faint shrug. And then you end up here. He gestured lightly around him, not dramatically, not bitterly, just stating it. Gabriel looked at him for a moment. You don't sound angry about it. Samuel thought about that, then shook his head. I was, he admitted, at first. Frustrated. Confused. Trying to figure out who or what to blame. A small pause. But that doesn't last forever. What replaces it? Gabriel asked. Samuel looked ahead again. Acceptance, he said. Not the kind where you give up. The kind where you stop fighting reality long enough to understand it. Gabriel processed that slowly, because it wasn't something he had practiced. You ever feel invisible? Samuel asked suddenly. Gabriel looked at him. In what way? Samuel gestured toward the passing crowd. Like you're there, but not really seen. Gabriel considered the question, then nodded slightly. In a different way, he said. Samuel glanced at him. How? Gabriel leaned back slightly, thinking. People see what I represent, he said. Not always who I am. Samuel nodded. Yeah, he said. That's still invisible. That connection, that understanding, bridged the gap between them in a way nothing else could. Different lives, different struggles, same feeling, and that realization made everything else less distant. Samuel took another sip of his coffee. Funny, right? He said. You've got everything people chase, and I've got almost nothing. But somehow we're both trying to figure something out. Gabriel let out a quiet breath. Yeah, he said. That is funny. Samuel smiled faintly. Or maybe it just means we're both still in the middle of our chapters. Gabriel looked at him, then nodded. Yeah, he said. Maybe we are. And for the first time, that didn't feel like something that needed fixing. It felt like something that needed understanding. That night, after they parted ways, Gabriel didn't go home immediately. Not because he was avoiding anything, but because his mind wasn't ready to return to the version of life that now felt incomplete. He walked. No destination again, just movement. But this time, it wasn't to escape something. It was to understand something. Samuel's words stayed with him, not loudly, not in a way that demanded attention, but quietly, persistently, like a thought that didn't need to be repeated to be present. Gabriel let that word sit in his mind as he walked past rows of buildings that all looked intentional, structured, well-maintained. Everything here had purpose. Everything had design. But belonging, that wasn't something you could design. It wasn't something you could schedule. And yet, Samuel had described it like it was natural, effortless, something that existed without being forced. Gabriel tried to remember if he had ever experienced something like that. Not in business, not in the world he had built, but earlier, before everything became defined by expectations. He slowed his steps slightly, his thoughts pulling him backward to a different time, a different version of himself. His upbringing had been nothing like Samuel's. There was no loud music echoing through the streets, no spontaneous gatherings, no blurred lines between family and community. Everything had been structured, clear, predictable. Dinner at the same time every evening. Conversations that stayed within certain boundaries. Respect, discipline, achievement. These weren't just encouraged, they were expected, and Gabriel met those expectations. He always had. From a young age, he understood what was required, what was valued, what mattered. Success wasn't something he discovered later. It was something he was guided toward from the beginning, and he followed that path without question, because it worked. It led somewhere. It produced results. But standing there now, years later, he realized something he hadn't questioned before. It also limited something, not his opportunities, not his progress, but his experience. Because in a life where everything is defined by structure, there's very little room for anything unplanned. Very little space for connection that doesn't serve a purpose. Very little tolerance for moments that don't lead to outcomes. Gabriel had always been surrounded by people, colleagues, partners, associates, even at home. But how many of those connections were real? Not functional, not beneficial, not expected, but real. The kind Samuel described. The kind where you didn't have to think about how you were perceived, or what role you were playing, or what was required of you. You just existed, and that was enough. Gabriel stopped walking for a moment, standing near the edge of the pavement, watching the city continue around him. People moved past him again, focused, directed, each person carrying something invisible, responsibilities, expectations, thoughts no one else could see. And suddenly, he saw it differently, not as movement, but as weight, because everyone looked like they were carrying something, even if they didn't show it, even if they didn't acknowledge it. And then his mind shifted back to Samuel, sitting against that wall, wearing a jacket that had clearly seen better days, holding a sign that said almost nothing, but meant everything. Samuel had less. That wasn't a question. Less comfort, less stability, less security. But somehow, he carried himself like he had more space, more ease, more lightness. And that didn't make sense, because by every logical measure, Gabriel's life should have felt lighter, more secure, more complete. But it didn't. It felt heavier, not because of struggle, but because of pressure, expectation, responsibility that never really paused, a constant need to maintain, improve, protect what had been built. And maybe that was the difference. Samuel was trying to build something. Gabriel was trying to sustain something. And sustaining came with its own kind of weight. A weight that didn't always show. A weight that didn't always get acknowledged. But a weight that stayed with you every day, in every decision, in every moment that didn't allow you to step outside of it. Gabriel exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair, because this wasn't something he had planned to confront. He hadn't gone out looking for perspective. He hadn't intended to question his life. But now, it was happening anyway. And the source of it was someone most people wouldn't even stop to talk to. That thought alone was enough to shift something deeper, because it challenged everything he had been conditioned to believe. That success brought clarity. That structure brought stability. That control brought peace. But what if it also came with distance? Distance from spontaneity. Distance from honesty. Distance from connection. Gabriel resumed walking, but slower now. Not because he was tired, but because he was thinking. And this time, he didn't try to organize those thoughts, didn't try to resolve them. He just let them exist. Because for once, there was no immediate solution required, no action plan, no decision waiting at the end, just awareness. And sometimes, that's where real change begins. Not in what you do, but in what you finally allow yourself to see. Gabriel reached the end of the street and paused briefly before crossing. As he looked ahead, he realized something simple but important. He was going to go back, not because he had to, not because Samuel expected him to, but because, For the first time in a long time, there was a conversation in his life that didn't feel like an obligation. There was a connection that didn't require performance. There was a moment in his day that felt real, and that was something he hadn't realized he was missing until now. The changes didn't happen all at once. They showed up in small moments, the kind that are easy to overlook unless you're paying attention. And Anne was paying attention. At first, it was something simple. Gabriel smiled more, not often, not dramatically, but enough for it to stand out. A brief moment during breakfast, a quiet reaction to something on his phone, a softened expression that didn't match his usual focus. It wasn't directed at her, and that's what made it noticeable, because for a long time, nothing about Gabriel had changed. He had been consistent, predictable, reliable in a way that felt controlled. Now, there were slight shifts, and Anne noticed them. She didn't say anything immediately, not because she didn't care, but because she wanted to understand what she was seeing first. That evening they sat in the living room instead of the dining table. No formal setup, no structured conversation, just space. Anne held a glass in her hand, her posture relaxed, but her attention sharp. Gabriel sat across from her, reviewing something on his tablet, focused, but not as distant as usual. "You've been different lately," Anne said. Her tone wasn't accusatory. It was observant. Gabriel looked up. "Different how?" Anne tilted her head slightly, studying him. "Less rigid," she said, more distracted. But not in a bad way. Gabriel considered that, then set the tablet aside. "I didn't realize it was that obvious." Anne gave a small smile. "It is, if you know what to look for." A pause. "What changed?" Gabriel leaned back slightly, exhaling through his nose. It was a simple question, but not an easy one. "I've just been thinking more," he said. Anne raised an eyebrow slightly. "You always think." Gabriel nodded. "Yeah," he admitted, "but this is different." "How?" Gabriel hesitated, not because he didn't want to answer, but because he wasn't used to explaining something that didn't have a clear structure. "I met someone," he said again. Anne's gaze sharpened slightly. She didn't interrupt, didn't react immediately, just waited. Gabriel noticed and clarified. "Not like that." Anne held his eyes. "I didn't say anything." "No," Gabriel replied, "but you were about to think it." That earned a faint smile from her. "Fair enough," she said. A brief silence settled. Then, "Who is he?" Anne asked. Gabriel paused, because reducing Samuel to a simple explanation didn't feel accurate, but he tried anyway. "Someone I started talking to," he said, "by chance." Anne leaned back slightly, crossing her arms. "And this person is enough to change your mood?" Gabriel thought about that, then nodded. "Yeah." Anne watched him carefully, not judging, but trying to understand. "That's interesting," she said. Gabriel tilted his head slightly. "Why?" "Because you don't usually let people in that easily," she replied. That was true, and they both knew it. "I didn't plan it," Gabriel said. Anne gave a small nod. "That's usually how it happens." Another pause. "Then, what's so different about him?" she asked. Gabriel looked down briefly, then back at her. "He doesn't try to be anything," he said. Anne frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" "It means," Gabriel paused, choosing his words carefully, "he doesn't filter himself. He doesn't adjust based on expectations. He just speaks." Anne considered that. "And that affects you?" Gabriel nodded. "More than I expected." Anne studied him for a moment longer, then asked, "Is he someone from work?" "No." "From your circle?" "No." That answer shifted something, slightly. Anne leaned forward just a bit. "Then where did you meet him?" Gabriel held her gaze. "On the street?" Anne blinked once, processing. "You mean just randomly?" "Yes." Another pause. "Then, and you've been going back?" Gabriel didn't hesitate. "Yes." Anne leaned back again, this time more slowly, taking that in. "All right," she said. Her tone wasn't negative, but it carried something thoughtful, something cautious. Gabriel noticed. "You think it's strange," he said. Anne shook her head slightly. "No," she replied. "I think it's unexpected." A small pause. Then, "I just want to understand why it matters to you." Gabriel leaned forward slightly, resting his hands together. "Because it feels real," he said. That answer came quicker than the others. more certain. Anne didn't respond immediately, because that word, real, carried weight. What do you mean by that? She asked quietly. Gabriel met her eyes. It doesn't feel like I'm performing, he said, or managing something, or maintaining an image. A pause. It's just a conversation. Anne held his gaze, and for a moment, something passed between them. Not jealousy, not suspicion, but recognition. Because what Gabriel described was something they had lost, and they both knew it. Anne looked down briefly, then back up. When was the last time we had a conversation like that? She asked. Gabriel didn't answer, because he didn't know, and that silence said enough. Anne exhaled softly, setting her glass down on the table. That's something we should probably think about, she said. Gabriel nodded. Yeah. Another pause. Then Anne looked at him again. Are you going to see him again? She asked. Gabriel didn't hesitate. Yes. Anne nodded slowly. Okay. Her response was calm, but not empty, because beneath it, there was something building, not conflict, not yet, but awareness, because something had entered their lives, not physically, but emotionally, and it was creating a shift neither of them could ignore anymore. Gabriel picked up his tablet again, but didn't turn it on. His focus wasn't there, and Anne noticed that too. You're thinking about it right now, aren't you? She said. Gabriel looked up, then gave a small, honest nod. Yeah. Anne leaned back slightly, studying him once more, then said quietly, I haven't seen you like this in a long time. Gabriel didn't respond, because he hadn't either. The conversation ended quietly. No argument, no unresolved words hanging in the air. Just silence that lingered a little longer than usual. Gabriel eventually returned to his tablet, though his attention wasn't fully on it. Anne remained seated for a moment, watching him, not openly, not in a way that demanded notice, but carefully, because something about him felt different, not distant, not withdrawn, just somewhere else, and that was new. Anne stood up slowly and walked toward the window, her reflection faintly visible in the glass as the city lights stretched beyond it. She wasn't upset, not exactly, but there was something she couldn't ignore, a question forming that didn't have a clear answer yet. Behind her, Gabriel shifted slightly, still seated, still quiet. Neither of them spoke, but the silence between them now carried more meaning than it had before. Anne folded her arms lightly, her gaze fixed outside. Then, without turning, do you enjoy talking to him? Gabriel looked up. The question was simple, but it wasn't casual. Yes, he said. No hesitation, no adjustment, just truth. Anne nodded slightly, still facing the window. I can tell. A small pause followed. Then she turned around, leaning lightly against the edge of the table. It's just, she began, then stopped briefly, choosing her words. You seem more present when you talk about him than when you talk about anything else. Gabriel didn't interrupt, because he knew. That wasn't an accusation. It was an observation. I hadn't noticed that, he said. Anne gave a faint smile. I have. Another pause. Then, it's not a bad thing, she added. It's just different. Gabriel leaned back slightly in his chair. How does it feel to you? He asked. Anne held his gaze. Honest? She said. Yes. She took a small breath. It feels like you found something you were missing, she said. A pause. Just not with me. That landed, not harshly, but clearly. Gabriel didn't react defensively, didn't dismiss it, because part of him understood what she meant. It's not about replacing anything, he said. Anne nodded. I know, but it still feels that way, she added quietly. Another silence followed, but this one wasn't empty. It was reflective, because both of them were acknowledging something they had avoided for a long time, the distance between them, not created by conflict, but by absence. Anne walked back to her seat and sat down again, her posture more relaxed now, but her expression more open. When we first got married, she said, we used to talk about everything. Gabriel listened. You remember that? She asked. Yes, he replied. We didn't need reasons, Anne continued. We didn't need structure. We just talked. A faint smile crossed her face, but it didn't last long, and somewhere along the way, that stopped. Gabriel nodded slowly. I think we got used to things working, he said. Anne gave a small, almost knowing laugh. Yeah, she said. We became very good at maintaining. There was that word again. Maintaining. Not building. Not growing. Just preserving. And now? Gabriel asked. Anne looked at him. Now her expression was clearer, more direct. Now it feels like we're both realizing that working isn't the same as feeling. Gabriel absorbed that, because it was true. And truth, when acknowledged, doesn't leave much room for avoidance. Anne leaned forward slightly, resting her hands together. I'm not upset that you met someone, she said. Gabriel watched her carefully. I'm just trying to understand why it had to come from outside our life, to bring something back into yours. That question was deeper than anything she had asked so far, and Gabriel didn't answer immediately, because he didn't have a clean explanation. I don't think it had to, he said finally. Anne raised an eyebrow slightly. Then why did it? Gabriel exhaled slowly. Because I didn't realize what was missing, he admitted. Anne studied him. And he helped you see that? Yes. Another pause. Anne leaned back slightly, processing. Then, do you talk about me? She asked. The question shifted the tone slightly. Not confrontational, but personal. Gabriel shook his head. No. Anne tilted her head. Why not? Gabriel hesitated, then answered honestly. Because it's not about explaining my life, he said. It's about understanding how I feel in it. Anne held his gaze, then nodded slowly. I see. Silence settled again, but this time it wasn't distant. It was aware. Anne stood up again, walking slowly across the room before stopping near the doorway. She turned back to look at him. I don't think you're doing anything wrong, she said. Gabriel didn't respond. I just think we've been ignoring something for a long time, she added. A small pause. And now it's becoming harder to ignore. That was it. No accusation, no demand, just clarity. And clarity has a way of shifting everything. Gabriel set his tablet aside completely now. No distractions, no avoidance, just presence. Anne noticed. You don't have to fix it tonight, she said. I know, Gabriel replied, but we can't pretend it's not there anymore. Gabriel nodded. Yeah. Another quiet moment passed between them. Then Anne gave a faint, almost thoughtful smile. Go see him tomorrow, she said. Gabriel looked at her. You're okay with that? Anne shrugged lightly. It's not about being okay with it, she said. It's about understanding what it means. Gabriel studied her for a moment, then nodded. All right. Anne turned slightly toward the hallway, then paused. And without looking back, she added softly, just don't forget. We used to have that too. Then she walked away, leaving Gabriel alone in the room, but not in the same way as before, because now there was something to face, not just in his life, but in his home. The question didn't come immediately. It waited, sat quietly between them over the next day, unspoken, but present. Gabriel went through his routine again. Meetings, decisions, conversations that required clarity and control. But underneath all of it, his mind returned to the same place. Anne, the conversation, what had been said, what hadn't, and more importantly, what could no longer be ignored. That evening, when he walked through the door, something felt different, not tense, not cold, but intentional. Anne was already there, sitting in the living room, not occupied with anything else. No phone in her hand, no background noise filling the space, just presence, waiting. Gabriel paused briefly as he stepped inside, taking that in. Hey, he said. Anne looked up. Hi. Her voice was calm, but direct, not distant, not distracted, focused. Gabriel closed the door behind him and walked further into the room, setting his keys down on the table. For a moment, neither of them spoke, but this silence wasn't like the others. This one had direction. Anne gestured lightly toward the seat across from her. Can we talk? Gabriel nodded. Of course. He sat down, not leaning back this time, not creating distance. Present. Anne watched him for a brief second, as if confirming something. Then she asked it, is there someone else? The question landed clean. No hesitation, no build-up, just truth, spoken plainly. Gabriel didn't react defensively, didn't look away, didn't take time to construct an answer, because the answer was already clear. Not like you think, he said. Anne held his gaze. That's not a no. Gabriel leaned forward slightly. It is a no, he clarified. There's no one else in that way. Anne studied him carefully, measuring not just the words, but the honesty behind them. And in another way? She asked. Gabriel paused, not because he was unsure, but because he wanted to answer it correctly. There's someone I've been talking to, he said. Anne nodded slowly. I know. A small pause. Then, and it matters to you. Yes. That answer came without hesitation again, and this time, Anne didn't look surprised. She had already seen it, felt it. What she needed now was understanding. Why? She asked. Gabriel exhaled slowly, because this was the question that mattered most. It's not about him, he said. Anne raised an eyebrow slightly. Then, what is it about? Gabriel held her gaze. It's about what I realized when I started talking to him. Anne leaned back slightly, folding her arms. Which is? Gabriel didn't rush it, didn't simplify it. He let the truth form clearly before speaking. That I've been disconnected, he said. Anne's expression didn't change, but her attention sharpened. From what? She asked. Gabriel didn't look away. From myself, he said. A pause. From you. That shifted the moment, because now they weren't talking around the issue anymore. They were inside it. Anne lowered her arms slowly, her posture softening just slightly. And you needed someone else to see that? She asked. Gabriel shook his head. No, he said. I needed something different to feel it. Anne absorbed that, not resisting it, not accepting it blindly either, just considering it. And what does that say about us? She asked quietly. Gabriel leaned back slightly, but his eyes stayed on hers. It says we got comfortable, he replied. Anne let out a small breath. That's one way to put it. Gabriel continued. We stopped checking in, he said. Not about schedules, not about responsibilities, about us. Anne nodded slowly. That's true. A brief silence followed. Then Anne spoke again. I've felt it too, she admitted. Gabriel listened. Not all at once, she added, but over time. Like something slowly faded, and we didn't notice because everything else still worked. That word again. Worked. Gabriel nodded. Yeah. Anne leaned forward slightly now. Do you still love me? She asked. The question was direct, unfiltered. Gabriel didn't hesitate. Yes. Anne held his gaze. Then why does it feel like we're not connected anymore? Gabriel didn't answer immediately, because this wasn't about quick responses. It was about truth, and truth required clarity. Because we stopped choosing it, he said. Anne blinked once, processing. What do you mean? She asked. Gabriel leaned forward slightly. We built something that runs on its own, he explained. Structure, routine, stability, a pause. But connection doesn't work like that. Anne listened fully. It requires attention, Gabriel continued. Time, presence. And we stopped giving it that. Anne sat back slowly, her expression thoughtful now. Not hurt, not defensive, just aware. And you think it's too late? She asked. Gabriel shook his head immediately. No. That answer came with certainty. Anne watched him closely. Then what do you think needs to happen? She asked. Gabriel didn't rush it. He took a breath, then said, we need to stop acting like everything is fine. A small silence followed. Then Anne gave a faint smile. That's honest, Gabriel nodded. And we need to start showing up again, he added. Not as partners managing a life, but as people who actually want to be in it. Anne's eyes held his. And you think we can do that? Gabriel didn't look away. Yes. Another pause. Then Anne leaned back slightly, exhaling through her nose. I don't want what we have to just look right, she said. Gabriel nodded. Neither do I. Anne studied him for a moment longer, then asked, are you going to keep seeing him? Gabriel didn't hesitate. Yes. Anne held his gaze, and this time there was no uncertainty in her expression. Okay, she said. A small pause. Then we figure this out while you do. That response wasn't what Gabriel expected. You're okay with that? He asked. Anne shook her head slightly. It's not about being okay, she said. It's about being real. That word again. Real. And now it applied to both of them. Anne stood up slowly, walking a few steps before stopping. Then she turned back to him. This doesn't get fixed overnight, she said. Gabriel nodded. I know, but it starts now. Gabriel met her eyes. Yes. Anne gave a small nod, then walked away. Not distant, not withdrawn, but thoughtful. And for the first time in a long time, they weren't avoiding anything. They weren't pretending. They were facing it together. The rain started before Gabriel left the building. Light at first, barely noticeable against the glass windows as droplets formed and slid down in uneven lines. But by the time he stepped outside, it had settled into something steadier, not heavy enough to stop the city, but persistent enough to make everything feel slower, quieter, different. Gabriel didn't hesitate. He pulled his coat slightly tighter and stepped into it, moving forward without calling for a car. This had become routine now, not planned, not scheduled, but expected. And today, more than the others, he felt it, a quiet pull, not obligation, not curiosity, something else, something closer to familiarity. The streets were less crowded than usual. People moved quicker, heads slightly lowered, focused on getting out of the rain rather than lingering in it. Shops closed earlier, conversations shortened. The city adjusted, but Gabriel didn't. He walked at the same steady pace, his eyes occasionally scanning ahead, not consciously, not urgently, just aware. The closer he got, the more that awareness sharpened, because even before he reached the corner, something felt off. It wasn't obvious, nothing dramatic, just different. The cafe lights were dimmer than usual, the street quieter, and the space near the wall empty. Gabriel slowed, not stopping completely, but enough to notice. He looked again. Same spot, same wall, but no Samuel, no jacket, no cardboard sign, nothing. Gabriel stood still for a moment, rain falling steadily around him now, tapping lightly against the pavement. He glanced toward the cafe. Inside, a staff member moved slowly behind the counter, cleaning up, preparing to close. Normal. Everything looked normal, except for the absence. Gabriel stepped closer to the wall, as if proximity might explain something, but it didn't, because there was nothing to explain. Samuel just wasn't there. Gabriel checked the time instinctively, not because Samuel had ever set one, but because routine creates expectation, and expectation, when unmet, creates questions. Maybe he was late. That was possible. It had happened before. Samuel wasn't someone who followed strict timing. Gabriel nodded slightly to himself. That made sense. So he waited, not sitting, not leaning, just standing nearby, hands in his coat pockets, watching the street. Minutes passed. People came and went. No sign of him. Gabriel shifted his weight slightly, glancing once more toward the cafe, then back at the empty space. Still nothing. The rain picked up slightly. Not enough to drive him away, but enough to make the waiting feel longer. He exhaled slowly. Maybe Samuel had moved, chosen a different spot for the night. That was reasonable. This wasn't a fixed place. There were no guarantees, no commitments, just a shared habit. Gabriel stepped back slightly, scanning the nearby area more carefully this time, looking beyond the usual corner, further down the street. Across the road, nothing. No familiar figure, no sign, no trace. And now, the unease started to settle in. Not panic, not yet, but something quieter, something that didn't sit comfortably, because this didn't feel like choice. It felt like interruption. Gabriel walked a few steps down the street, his pace slightly quicker now. Not rushed, but more focused. He glanced into a nearby alley, empty, checked another corner. Still nothing. The city continued around him, unaware, unchanged. But for Gabriel, something had shifted, because this wasn't just about someone not showing up. It was about the absence of something that had become important. He stopped again. Rain, now more noticeable, against his coat. He ran a hand briefly over his face, thinking, then turned back toward the cafe. This time, he stepped inside. The warmth hit immediately, a contrast to the damp air outside. The staff member looked up briefly. "Sorry, we're closing," they said. Gabriel nodded. "I won't be long," he replied. He stepped closer to the counter. "Do you know the guy who sits outside?" he asked. The staff member paused, thinking, "The one with the sign?" They said, "Yes." They nodded slightly. "Yeah, I've seen him around." Gabriel held their gaze. "Have you seen him today?" A small pause. No, they said. "Not today." Gabriel's jaw tightened slightly. "Are you sure?" "Yeah," they replied. "He's usually there before we close. Didn't see him this evening." That confirmed it. Something wasn't right. Gabriel nodded once. "All right. Thanks." He turned and walked back outside. The rain hadn't stopped. If anything, it had settled deeper into the night. steady, unchanging. He stood there again, looking at the spot, now emptier than before. Because now, it wasn't uncertainty. It was absence, and absence feels different once you recognize it. Gabriel exhaled slowly, his mind moving through possibilities. Maybe Samuel found somewhere else to go. Maybe he decided not to come back. Maybe... But none of those thoughts felt right, because Samuel had been consistent, not in schedule, but in presence. And something about this didn't align with that. Gabriel stepped back, his gaze still fixed on the wall for a moment longer. Then, in the distance, a sound cut through the steady rhythm of the rain, faint at first, then clearer, a siren, approaching. Gabriel's head turned slightly, his eyes scanning the street. The sound grew louder, closer, more defined, and something in his chest shifted, not because of what he saw, but because of what he felt, a connection forming between two moments that hadn't fully met yet. The ambulance turned the corner at the far end of the street, lights flashing against the wet pavement. People stepped aside, movement adjusted. The city made space. Gabriel didn't move, not yet. He just stood there, watching, listening, and suddenly, that quiet unease didn't feel so quiet anymore. The ambulance didn't slow down until it reached the corner, lights flashing sharply against the rain-soaked street. The tires cut through shallow water as it stopped abruptly, just a short distance from where Gabriel stood. For a brief moment, everything around it shifted. People who had been walking quickly now paused, not stepping forward, just watching. The same pattern, the same distance. Gabriel didn't think. He moved, fast, closing the gap between himself and the scene before the crowd could fully gather. As he approached, he saw it. A small cluster of people standing around something on the ground. Not close enough to help, just close enough to observe. Gabriel pushed through without hesitation. "Excuse me, move." No resistance. People stepped aside easily, because his tone left no room for delay. And then he saw him, Samuel, lying on the pavement, unconscious, rain falling against his face, his jacket soaked through, one arm slightly bent beneath him. The cardboard sign lay a short distance away, damp, edges curling slightly from the water. Gabriel's chest tightened, not sharply, but enough to confirm what he already felt before he saw it. This wasn't coincidence. This was him. A paramedic was already kneeling beside Samuel, checking his pulse, while another prepared equipment. "Pulse is weak," one of them said. "Let's move quickly." Gabriel stepped closer, not interfering, but not staying back either. "What happened?" he asked. One of the paramedics glanced up briefly. "Collapsed," they said. "Looks like exhaustion. Possibly more. We're stabilizing him now." Gabriel nodded once. His eyes didn't leave Samuel, didn't shift, didn't look away. Because seeing him like this changed everything. Samuel wasn't speaking, wasn't smiling, wasn't making light of anything. He was still, too still. The paramedic adjusted something near his neck, then spoke again. "Sir, we need space." Gabriel stepped back half a step, just enough, but he didn't leave. He couldn't, because this wasn't just someone on the street anymore. This was someone he knew, someone he had spoken to, someone who had, in a short amount of time, become part of his routine, part of his thoughts, part of something he didn't fully understand yet. And now, he was here, on the ground, unconscious. The paramedics worked quickly, efficient, focused, no wasted movement. They lifted Samuel carefully, positioning him onto the stretcher. One secured the straps, while the other checked his vitals again. "Stay with me," the paramedic said firmly. "Stay with me." No response. Gabriel's jaw tightened slightly, not out of panic, but out of something deeper, something more controlled, but just as strong. Responsibility. He stepped forward again as they began moving the stretcher. "I'm coming with you," he said. One of the paramedics glanced at him. "You family?" they asked. A pause, just long enough to matter. Gabriel didn't overthink it this time. "No," he said. Then, "I'm with him." That was enough. The paramedic gave a short nod. "All right, let's go." They moved quickly toward the ambulance, lifting the stretcher inside. Equipment followed. Voices sharpened. "Monitor on. 4 ready. Let's move." Gabriel climbed in right after them, the doors shutting firmly behind him. And just like that, The outside world disappeared. Inside, everything was tighter, more focused, more real. Samuel lay on the stretcher, his condition unchanged, pale still. The machines began their quiet work, tracking what his body was struggling to maintain. Gabriel sat beside him, closer than before, not as someone observing, but as someone involved. He didn't speak immediately, didn't interrupt the paramedics as they worked. He just watched every movement, every adjustment, every signal on the monitor, because for the first time, this wasn't just a conversation. This wasn't perspective. This wasn't reflection. This was real, immediate, unavoidable. One of the paramedics adjusted the IV line, then glanced at Gabriel briefly. "Do you know his medical history?" they asked. Gabriel shook his head. "No." "When did you last see him?" "Yesterday." The paramedic nodded, returning to their work. "Has he been eating regularly? Drinking?" Gabriel paused, because he didn't know. Not fully, not enough. "I don't know," he admitted. That stayed with him, because for all the conversations they had, there were still gaps. Things he hadn't asked, things Samuel hadn't said. And now, those details mattered. The ambulance moved steadily through the city, the siren cutting through the night again. But inside, everything felt contained, focused on one thing, keeping Samuel stable. Gabriel leaned forward slightly, his hands resting on his knees, his eyes fixed on Samuel. "You said tomorrow," he murmured quietly. No response. But he didn't expect one. Not yet, because right now, it wasn't about words. It was about presence, about staying, about not walking away. The paramedic checked the monitor again. "We're getting a response," they said. "That's good." Gabriel exhaled slowly. Not relief, not fully, but something close, because even a small sign mattered. The ambulance turned sharply, slowing as it approached the hospital. The motion shifted slightly, then steadied. "We're here," one of the paramedics said. The doors opened quickly. Movement resumed, fast, controlled. Samuel was wheeled out immediately, the transition seamless. Gabriel stepped out right after them. Rain still falling, lights still flashing, but none of it mattered now, because everything had narrowed to one thing: getting him inside, getting him help. And Gabriel didn't hesitate, didn't question, didn't step back. He followed every step, all the way in. The hospital doors closed behind them, with a firm, controlled motion. Everything inside moved quickly, but not chaotically. Purpose guided every step, every instruction, every second. Samuel was pushed through the corridor, the wheels of the stretcher rolling smoothly against the polished floor. Voices overlapped in short, precise exchanges as medical staff took over, each person stepping into their role without hesitation. Vitals? Stabilizing. Get him into observation. Now, Gabriel followed closely behind, not in the way of the process, but not distant from it either, because walking away wasn't an option. They turned a corner, then another, and just like that, Samuel was taken into a room. The door closed, leaving Gabriel standing outside, alone. For the first time since the ambulance, there was stillness. No immediate action, no instructions to follow, just waiting and waiting. Feels different when you don't have control. Gabriel stood there, his hands resting loosely at his sides, his focus fixed on the closed door. Minutes passed, slowly, each one stretching longer than it should. People moved past him in the hallway. Doctors, nurses, patients, all continuing with their own responsibilities. But Gabriel didn't move, because everything that mattered was behind that door. Finally, a nurse stepped out. Gabriel straightened slightly. "How is he?" he asked. The nurse gave a small, reassuring nod. "He's stable," she said. Exhaustion, dehydration, lack of proper nutrition over time. His body just reached its limit. Gabriel exhaled slowly, not relief, but release, because now there was clarity. "Can I see him?" he asked. The nurse studied him briefly, then nodded. For a few minutes, that was enough. Gabriel stepped inside. The room was quiet, dim, controlled. Samuel lay on the bed, connected to monitors again. His condition improved, but still fragile. His breathing was steady now, slower, more natural. Gabriel pulled a chair beside the bed and sat down, not rushing to speak, not forcing anything. Just there, Because this moment didn't need words immediately. It needed presence. He looked at Samuel for a long second. Seeing him like this was different, not because Samuel had changed, but because the reality of his situation was no longer something that could be softened by conversation. It was clear, unavoidable, and real. Gabriel leaned forward slightly, resting his hands together. "You don't get to disappear like that," he said quietly. No response. But again, he didn't expect one. A few moments passed. Then, a slight movement. Samuel's fingers shifted faintly. Gabriel noticed immediately, leaning forward, just a bit more. "Samuel?" A breath, then another, and slowly, Samuel's eyes opened. Not sharply, not fully, but enough. His gaze adjusted slowly to the room, to the light, to the unfamiliar ceiling above him. Confusion passed briefly across his face. Then, recognition. He turned his head slightly, saw Gabriel, and, despite everything, a small, tired smile appeared. "You came," Samuel murmured. Gabriel let out a quiet breath. "Yeah," he said. "You missed our conversation." Samuel blinked slowly. "Guess I took a longer break than planned." Gabriel shook his head slightly. "You don't get to make that decision like that." Samuel let out a weak breath that almost sounded like a laugh. Didn't feel like much of a choice. Gabriel leaned back slightly, studying him. "That's the problem," he said. "You didn't treat it like one." Samuel didn't respond immediately, because he knew that wasn't just a statement. It was truth. After a moment, Samuel shifted slightly on the bed, wincing just a bit. "Where am I?" he asked. "Hospital," Gabriel replied. Samuel nodded faintly. Figured. A brief silence settled between them. Then Samuel glanced at him again. "You stayed?" Gabriel didn't hesitate. "Yes." Samuel looked at him for a second longer, then nodded. "Appreciate that." Another pause. Then Gabriel leaned forward slightly, more serious now. "Samuel, I need to say something." Samuel looked at him, still calm, still present, even in this condition. "What is it?" he asked. Gabriel held his gaze. "You helped me more than you think," he said. Samuel frowned slightly. "How?" Gabriel didn't rush it, didn't simplify it. He spoke clearly. "By being honest," he said, "by not pretending. By showing up as yourself without trying to fit into anything." A pause. "That made me realize how much I've been holding back." Samuel listened. Quietly, Gabriel continued. "I've spent years building something that works," he said. "But somewhere along the way, I stopped asking if it actually felt right." Samuel's expression softened slightly. "Yeah," he said quietly. "That happens." Gabriel nodded. "But you didn't let your situation define how you think," he added. "And that matters." Another pause. Then Gabriel shifted slightly in his seat, this time more intentional. "Which is why I'm not just here because you collapsed," he said. Samuel looked at him more carefully now. "What do you mean?" Gabriel met his eyes. "I want to help you," he said. Samuel didn't react immediately. Not surprised, not eager, just listening. Gabriel continued. "Not just get you through this," he clarified. "Not just food or a place to stay for a few nights." A pause. "I want to help you rebuild." The room went quiet, not tense, but focused, because that was a different kind of offer. Samuel held his gaze. Then, after a moment, he asked the question that mattered most. "Why?" Gabriel didn't hesitate. "Because you didn't ask me for anything," he said, "and that told me everything I needed to know." Samuel studied him carefully, then let out a slow breath. "That's not a reason to change someone's life," he said. Gabriel nodded. "You're right," he replied. A small pause. "Then it's a reason to give them a chance to change it themselves." That landed because it shifted the meaning completely. Not control, not charity, opportunity. Samuel looked away briefly, processing, then back at Gabriel. "You don't even know me like that," he said. Gabriel leaned back slightly. "I know enough," he replied. A pause. "And I can learn the rest." Samuel let out a faint breath. Not a laugh, not resistance, just thought, because this was different. Not something he could dismiss easily, but not something he could accept without question either. "I don't want to be saved," Samuel said finally. His voice was still weak. but clear. Gabriel nodded immediately. Good, he said. Samuel frowned slightly. Good? Gabriel leaned forward again. Because I don't do handouts, he said. I build opportunities. A brief silence followed. Then Samuel looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, there was something different in his expression. Not just calm, not just understanding, but consideration. Because this offer wasn't simple. It wasn't temporary. It meant something, and Samuel knew that. The question now was what he would do with it. The room stayed quiet after Gabriel's words settled, not because there was nothing left to say, but because what had been said carried weight, the kind that doesn't need to be repeated. Samuel leaned back slightly against the hospital bed, his eyes drifting toward the ceiling for a moment, not avoiding Gabriel, just thinking, because this wasn't a simple situation, and he knew that. Opportunity. It sounded good. It always did. But Samuel had heard promises before, seen chances that looked real until they weren't. And that memory didn't disappear just because this moment felt different. You make it sound easy, Samuel said finally. Gabriel didn't interrupt, didn't correct him. He just listened. It's not, Samuel continued. Starting over isn't just about getting a chance. It's about trusting it. Gabriel nodded slightly. That's fair. Samuel turned his head, looking at him again. You trust people easily? He asked. Gabriel paused briefly, then shook his head. No. Samuel gave a faint, knowing expression. Yeah, he said. Didn't think so. A short silence followed. Then Samuel continued. So why should I? The question was direct, not defensive, not confrontational, just honest. And Gabriel respected that. You shouldn't, Gabriel said. Samuel frowned slightly. That's not a great answer. Gabriel leaned back in his chair, his posture relaxed but his tone steady. You shouldn't trust me just because I'm offering something, he clarified. You should trust what you do with the opportunity. If you decide to take it. Samuel watched him carefully, processing. That still involves trusting you, he said. It involves giving me a chance, Gabriel replied, the same way you expect tomorrow to give you one. That connection was intentional, and it landed. Samuel looked away briefly, exhaling slowly, because that was something he understood. Trying again tomorrow. It had always been his mindset, but trying again usually meant relying on himself, not someone else. And what exactly does this opportunity look like? Samuel asked. Gabriel didn't hesitate. Structure, he said. A place to start. Something that gives you direction without taking away your independence. Samuel raised an eyebrow slightly. That sounds like a job. Gabriel gave a small nod. In a way, yes. Samuel let out a faint breath. I haven't exactly had the best track record with those. Gabriel leaned forward slightly. I'm not interested in your past mistakes, he said. I'm interested in how you think now. That shifted something. Because most people focused on what Samuel had done wrong, not who he had become. Samuel studied him again. You don't think that matters? He asked. It does, Gabriel replied, but not more than what you do next. A pause. Then, and from what I've seen, you don't give up easily. Samuel looked down at his hands for a moment. Not in shame, not in doubt, just reflection. Not giving up doesn't always mean moving forward, he said. Gabriel nodded. True, he replied, but it means you're still in the position to. Another silence settled, but this one was different, because now Samuel wasn't just listening, he was considering, and that meant something. After a moment, Samuel shifted slightly, adjusting his position. You said you don't do handouts, he said. Gabriel nodded. I don't. Then what do you expect from me? The question was important, because it defined everything. Gabriel answered without hesitation. Effort, he said. Consistency. And honesty. Samuel held his gaze. That's it? That's everything, Gabriel replied. A brief pause. Then Samuel let out a small breath. You make it sound simple. It's not, Gabriel said, but it's clear. Samuel leaned his head back slightly, looking at the ceiling again, because clarity was something he hadn't had in a long time. Life had become unpredictable, unstable. One day, blending into the next, without direction. And now, someone was offering structure again. But this time, it didn't feel forced. It didn't feel controlling. It felt optional. And that made all the difference. "What happens if I mess it up?" Samuel asked quietly. Gabriel didn't hesitate. "Then you learn from it," he said. Samuel looked at him again. "And that's it." "That's how growth works," Gabriel replied. "Not by avoiding mistakes, but by not repeating them." Samuel studied him for a long second, because that answer wasn't what he was used to. No pressure, no threat of failure being final. Just accountability. And that was rare. "You really believe that?" Samuel asked. "Yes," Gabriel said. No hesitation, no doubt, just certainty. Samuel let out a slow breath, then gave a faint, almost thoughtful smile. "You're different from most people I've met," he said. Gabriel raised an eyebrow slightly. "Good or bad?" Samuel shrugged lightly. "I haven't decided yet." That earned a small reaction from Gabriel. Not quite a laugh, but close. Another pause settled. Then Samuel spoke again. "If I say yes," he said, "this changes everything." Gabriel nodded. "It should." Samuel's expression became more serious. "And if I say no?" Gabriel held his gaze. "Then nothing changes," he said, "except you'll know you had the option." That answer was important because it removed pressure. It left the decision exactly where it belonged, with Samuel. No expectations, no obligation, just choice. Samuel sat with that, quietly letting it settle, because for the first time in a long time, he wasn't being pushed. He wasn't being judged. He wasn't being told what he had to do. He was being given a chance to decide. And that was something he hadn't had in a while. After a long moment, Samuel looked back at Gabriel, his expression clearer now, more certain. "I'm not saying yes yet," he said. Gabriel nodded. "I didn't expect you to," Samuel continued, "but I'm not saying no either." A small pause. Then, "I need to think." Gabriel leaned back slightly. "That's the right move." Samuel held his gaze. "You'll still be here?" he asked. Gabriel didn't hesitate. "Yes." That answer was simple, but it mattered, because it meant consistency, not just words. Presence. Samuel nodded slowly. "All right." And just like that, the decision wasn't made, but it had begun. The decision didn't come immediately, and Gabriel didn't rush it. Days passed, not many, but enough for the weight of the choice to settle properly. Samuel was discharged from the hospital with clear instructions: rest, proper meals, and time to recover. For the first time in a long while, his body wasn't running on survival alone. It felt unfamiliar, slower, more stable, but also more reflective, because when you're not constantly trying to get through the day, you start thinking about what comes next. And that question stayed with him. Gabriel didn't disappear. He checked in, not constantly, not in a way that felt overwhelming, but consistently. A message, a visit, simple presence. And that mattered, because Samuel was watching, not just what Gabriel said, but what he did. And so far, it aligned. One afternoon, as Samuel sat near a window in the recovery space he'd been placed in temporarily, he stared out at the city. Same streets, same movement, but a different perspective, because this time, he wasn't sitting on the pavement. He wasn't holding a sign. He wasn't wondering how the next day would unfold. He had space, and with space came clarity. The door opened quietly. Gabriel stepped in. No formal energy, no pressure, just him. "How are you feeling?" he asked. Samuel glanced at him. "Better," he said. "Still getting used to this." Gabriel nodded. "That's expected." A brief silence followed. Then Samuel leaned back slightly in his chair. "I've been thinking," he said. Gabriel didn't interrupt. Samuel continued. "About what you said." A pause. "About the opportunity." Gabriel held his gaze. "And," he asked. Samuel exhaled slowly, because this wasn't just a response. It was a decision. "I'll try," he said. Simple, clear, no overstatement, but it meant everything. Gabriel didn't react dramatically, didn't over-celebrate it. He just nodded. "All right." Samuel studied him for a moment. "That's it?" he asked. "No speech? No expectations?" Gabriel gave a small, calm response. "We've already covered that," he said. "Now it's about action." Samuel nodded faintly. "Fair enough." A short pause followed. Then Gabriel reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small folded document, placing it gently on the table. Samuel looked at it, then back at him. "What's that?" he asked. "A starting point," Gabriel replied. Samuel picked it up slowly, unfolding it. His eyes moved across the page, not rushed, careful, because every word mattered now. It wasn't overwhelming. It wasn't complicated. It outlined something clear. A role within one of Gabriel's community outreach initiatives. Structured, defined, but not restrictive. Samuel read it fully, then looked up again. "You're serious about this?" he said. Gabriel met his eyes. "I wouldn't offer it if I wasn't." Samuel nodded slowly. Another pause. Then, "What exactly would I be doing?" he asked. Gabriel leaned back slightly. "You'd be working with people who are in situations similar to where you were," he said, not from a position of authority, but from understanding. Samuel's expression shifted slightly, more focused now. "You think they'd listen to me?" he asked. Gabriel didn't hesitate. "Yes." Samuel frowned slightly. "Why?" Gabriel leaned forward just a bit. "Because you don't speak like someone who's guessing," he said. "You speak like someone who's lived it." That was true, and Samuel knew it. But hearing it said like that changed how it felt. "You wouldn't be there to fix people," Gabriel continued. "You'd be there to connect, to guide, to show what's possible without forcing it." Samuel looked down briefly at the document again, then back up. "That's a lot of responsibility." Gabriel nodded. "It is." Another pause. Then, "And you think I'm ready for that?" Gabriel held his gaze. "I think you understand it," he said, "and that matters more." Samuel let out a slow breath, because this wasn't just about starting over. It was about stepping into something meaningful, something that required him to show up, not just for himself, but for others, and that was different. "I don't want to mess this up," Samuel said quietly. Gabriel shook his head slightly. "You're going to make mistakes," he said. "That's part of it." Samuel looked at him. "Then why trust me with it?" Gabriel's answer was simple. "Because you care." That landed, because it wasn't about skill or experience. It was about intention, and that couldn't be taught. Samuel leaned back slightly, letting that settle, then nodded. "All right," he said. A small pause. "Let's do it." Gabriel gave a single nod in return. "Good." No dramatic handshake, no formal agreement, just understanding. Because the real work would begin after this moment. Gabriel stood up. "I'll have everything set up," he said. "You'll start slow. No pressure to jump in immediately." Samuel nodded. "I appreciate that." Gabriel moved toward the door, then paused. Samuel looked up. "Yeah?" Gabriel held his gaze for a moment. "Then, you made the right decision." Samuel didn't respond right away, because part of him was still processing it, but another part already knew. "Let's hope so," he said. Gabriel gave a small, knowing look, then stepped out, leaving Samuel alone again, but not in the same way as before, because now he wasn't waiting for tomorrow. He was preparing for it. The first day didn't feel real, not because it was overwhelming, but because it was different. Samuel stood just outside the building, looking up at it for a moment longer than necessary, not intimidated, not hesitant, just aware, because this wasn't a place he had passed by before without thinking. This was a place he was about to walk into, with purpose. He adjusted his jacket slightly. New, not expensive, not flashy, but clean, fitted, intentional, and that alone felt unfamiliar. Gabriel stood a few steps ahead, not rushing him, not guiding him forcefully, just present. "Ready?" he asked. Samuel let out a small breath, then nodded. "Yeah." And with that, they stepped inside. The environment was structured, but not cold. People moved with direction, but not pressure. Conversations happened, but they didn't feel forced. It wasn't corporate. It wasn't chaotic. It sat somewhere in between, and that balance was noticeable. Samuel's eyes moved around the space, taking everything in, not as an outsider, but not fully as someone who belonged yet, either. And that was okay, because belonging takes time. Gabriel walked beside him, speaking as they moved. "This isn't about perfection," he said. "It's about consistency." Samuel nodded. "I understand. You won't have all the answers," Gabriel added. "You're not expected to." Samuel glanced at him. "Then what am I expected to do?" Gabriel stopped walking, turning slightly to face him. "Show up," he said. "Simple, clear." Samuel nodded once. "I can do that?" Gabriel gave a small nod in return. "I know." They continued walking, eventually reaching a smaller space within the building, less formal, more open. A few people were already there, sitting, talking quietly among themselves. Some looked tired, some distracted, some present, but distant in their own way. Samuel noticed it immediately because he recognized it, not from observation, but from experience. Gabriel stepped slightly aside, giving him space, not introducing him, not positioning him, just allowing him to enter the moment on his own. Samuel took a step forward, then another. No speech, no announcement. He simply sat down and waited. A few of the others glanced at him briefly, curious, but not questioning, because in a place like this, everyone had their own story, and no one rushed to define someone else's. A moment passed, then another, and then someone spoke. "You knew?" Samuel looked over. "Yeah," he said. A small nod came in response. "Same," the person replied. That was it. No pressure, no expectation, just acknowledgement. Samuel leaned back slightly, letting the environment settle around him. This wasn't about proving anything. It wasn't about explaining himself. It was about being present. And slowly, that became easier. Over the next few days, the rhythm started to form. Samuel didn't rush into conversations. He didn't try to lead. He observed, listened, understood. And when he spoke, it wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't structured. It was real. One afternoon, someone sitting across from him asked, "How'd you get out of it?" Samuel paused, not because he didn't know, but because he wanted to answer it honestly. "I didn't get out of it," he said. "I just started moving differently." The person frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" Samuel leaned forward just a bit. "It means I stopped waiting for things to change on their own," he said, "and started accepting that I had to be part of that change." A small silence followed. "Then, that sounds easier than it is," the person replied. Samuel nodded. "It is," he said, "but it starts small." That conversation didn't end with a breakthrough. No sudden transformation, but something shifted, because understanding is often the first step, and Samuel knew that, because he had lived it. As the days turned into weeks, something became clear. He wasn't just adjusting, he was growing. Not dramatically, not in a way that needed recognition, but steadily. His posture changed. His tone became more certain. His presence more grounded. And people noticed, not because he tried to stand out, but because he didn't try to. Gabriel observed it too, from a distance, not interfering, not directing, just watching, because this was exactly what he had hoped for. One evening after a long day, Samuel stepped outside the building and paused. The air felt different, not because the city had changed, but because he had. He looked down the street for a moment, then smiled slightly, because for the first time in a long time, he wasn't thinking about survival. He was thinking about progress. And that was a different kind of feeling. If you've ever been in a place where everything felt uncertain, where each day felt like something you just had to get through, then you understand how powerful this moment is. Because change doesn't always come in big, dramatic ways. Sometimes it starts with one decision, one step, one moment where you choose to try again. If that means something to you, take a second right now. Like this video, share it with someone who might need it, and drop a comment saying, "Change." Because stories like this don't just entertain, they remind people what's possible. And sometimes that reminder is all someone needs to start again. Samuel looked up again. The city still moving, still busy, still unaware. But this time, he wasn't invisible in it. He was part of it. And more importantly, he was moving forward in it. The house looked the same. Nothing had changed on the surface. The lights were set just the way they always were. Soft, controlled, balanced, everything in its place. Every detail aligned with intention. But this time, Gabriel didn't walk in the same way. He paused just after stepping through the door, not because he was unsure, but because he was aware of how many times he had entered this space without truly being present in it, aware of how often routine had replaced attention, and aware that if anything was going to change, it had to start here. He closed the door behind him, slower than usual. The quiet inside didn't feel empty. It felt waiting, and His voice carried gently through the space. "I'm here," she replied. He followed the sound into the living room. Anne sat on the couch, not distracted, not occupied, just there. A book rested beside her, unopened, as if she had been thinking more than reading. She looked up as he entered. There was no tension in her expression, no guarded distance, but there was something new, presence. "You're back early," she said. Gabriel nodded slightly. Yeah. He didn't move past her, didn't head toward another room. Instead, he stayed, standing for a brief moment, before sitting down across from her, not with distance, but closer than usual, intentional. Anne noticed immediately. "You didn't go to your office?" she asked. Gabriel shook his head. "No." A small pause. "Did something happen?" Gabriel leaned forward slightly, resting his hands together. "Yes," he said. Anne's attention sharpened. "What?" Gabriel didn't hesitate. "I realized I've been showing up everywhere, except where it matters most." The words landed clearly. Anne didn't interrupt, didn't question. She just listened, because this was different. Gabriel continued. "I've been present in meetings, in decisions, in everything that requires responsibility." A pause. "But not here." Anne held his gaze. "And now?" she asked. Gabriel didn't look away. "Now I want to change that." The room fell quiet, not heavy, but focused. Because intention, when spoken clearly, creates space for something new. Anne leaned back slightly, studying him, not skeptically, but carefully. "What does that mean to you?" she asked. Gabriel exhaled slowly. "It means I stop assuming this will just work on its own," he said. Anne nodded faintly. "And instead?" she asked. Gabriel met her eyes. "I choose it." That word, choose, carried weight, because it implied action, consistency, effort. Anne looked down briefly, then back up. "You've said things like this before," she said. Not accusing, just honest. Gabriel nodded. "I know." "Then what makes this different?" Gabriel didn't rush his answer, because this time, it wasn't about saying the right thing. It was about meaning it. "I understand it now," he said. Anne raised an eyebrow slightly. "Understand what?" Gabriel leaned forward a bit more. "That connection isn't automatic," he said. "It doesn't stay just because it started." A pause. "It has to be maintained differently than everything else." Anne watched him closely. "And you didn't know that before?" Gabriel gave a small, almost reflective nod. "I thought I did," he admitted. "But I treated it like everything else in my life." Anne tilted her head slightly. "Structured," she said. "Yes." "Controlled?" "Yes." "Predictable?" Gabriel nodded again. "Yes." Anne leaned back slightly, exhaling through her nose. "That's not how this works," she said. "I know," Gabriel replied. And this time, he did. A brief silence settled between them. Then Anne shifted slightly, her tone softening just a bit. "What changed?" she asked. Gabriel paused, not because he didn't have an answer, but because he wanted to give the right one. "Perspective," he said. Anne studied him. "From him?" Gabriel nodded. "Yes." A small pause. Anne didn't react negatively, didn't question it. She just accepted it, because the truth didn't need defending. "And what did you learn?" she asked. Gabriel leaned back slightly, thinking that having everything in place doesn't mean everything is right, he said. Anne gave a faint smile. "That sounds familiar." Gabriel looked at her. "Yeah," he said. "It should." Another pause. "Then, I also learned that showing up matters more than anything else," he added. Anne held his gaze. "Then show up," she said. "Simple, direct, no conditions, no expectations attached, just truth." Gabriel nodded. "I am," he said. And for once, that didn't feel like a statement. It felt like a decision. Anne watched him for a moment longer, then asked, "What does that look like right now?" Gabriel didn't hesitate. "This," he said. She tilted her head slightly. "Talking?" "Listening," he corrected. Anne gave a small, almost surprised reaction, then nodded. "All right." A brief silence followed. Then Anne leaned forward slightly. "Then listen," she said. And for the first time in a long time, they didn't rush the conversation. They didn't filter it. They didn't reduce it to updates or logistics. They spoke honestly about things they had avoided, about how they had changed, about what they still wanted, about what they had lost, and what they could rebuild. Not perfectly, not instantly, but intentionally. Time passed without either of them noticing, because for once, they weren't focused on time. They were focused on each other, and that made all the difference. Eventually, the conversation slowed, not because it ended, but because it reached a place of understanding. Anne leaned back slightly, her expression softer now. "Feels different," she said. Gabriel nodded. "Yeah." A small pause. Then Anne gave a faint smile. "More real." Gabriel returned it. "Exactly." And for the first time in a long while, that word didn't feel distant. It felt present, because they weren't trying to appear complete anymore. They were choosing to be honest. And sometimes, that's where everything starts to come back together. Not everything changed overnight. And that was the point. There were no sudden transformations, no perfect days that followed, no moment where everything became easy again. Because real change doesn't work like that. It builds quietly, consistently, one decision at a time. Samuel continued showing up every day, not because he had to, but because he chose to. And that difference shaped everything. At first, he still felt like he was finding his place. Not fully settled, not fully certain, but present. And that was enough. Because presence leads to progress. And progress builds confidence. The conversations he had became more natural, less careful, more direct. People listened, not because he spoke perfectly, but because he spoke honestly. And honesty carries weight. One afternoon, someone sat across from him, quieter than most, eyes low, voice uncertain. "I don't think things change for people like me," they said. Samuel leaned forward slightly, not rushing to respond, not dismissing the feeling. He understood it, because he had lived it. "They don't," Samuel said. The person looked up, confused. "What do you mean?" Samuel held their gaze. "They don't change on their own," he said. "That's the part no one tells you." A pause. "You have to decide to change with them." Silence followed, but it wasn't empty. It was processing, because that truth was simple, but not easy. And Samuel didn't try to make it easy. He just made it clear. Across the room, Gabriel stood quietly, observing, not stepping in, not directing, just watching, because what he saw was exactly what he had hoped for. Not perfection, not performance, but impact, real impact. And that couldn't be forced. It had to be lived. Later that evening, Samuel stepped outside again. The same city, the same movement, the same rhythm, but a different version of himself, standing within it. He walked slowly this time, not because he had nowhere to go, but because he finally understood where he was going. As he passed familiar streets, his eyes caught something. A corner, a wall, the same spot where he used to sit, where he used to wait, where he used to hold a sign that said everything, without asking for anything. He stopped, just for a moment, looking at it, not with regret, not with shame, but with understanding, because that place was part of his story. Not something to erase, something to remember. He exhaled slowly, then smiled. A small one, but real, because now, tomorrow wasn't something he hoped for. It was something he was building. Across the city, in a different space, Gabriel sat at home, not working, not distracted, just present. Anne sat beside him, closed, comfortable, no tension, no performance, just connection. They weren't perfect. They still had things to figure out. Still had moments where old habits tried to return, but now they noticed, they adjusted, they chose differently, and that made all the difference. Anne glanced at him. "You've changed," she said. Gabriel looked at her. "So have you." She smiled faintly. "Feels better this way." Gabriel nodded. "Yeah." A small pause. Then, "I think we forgot what this was supposed to feel like," he added. Anne leaned her head back slightly. "Maybe we just needed to be reminded." Gabriel thought about that, then nodded. "Yeah," he said. "Maybe we did." And that reminder didn't come from success or structure or control. It came from something simpler, something more human, connection, the kind that doesn't require perfection, the kind that doesn't rely on appearances, the kind that exists when people choose to be real. Samuel had nothing and still held on to that. Gabriel had everything and had to rediscover it. And in the end, that was the lesson. Life isn't about how complete things look. It's about how real they feel, because you can have success and still feel disconnected. You can have stability and still feel uncertain. You can have everything and still feel like something is missing. Until you choose to see differently, to show up differently, to live differently. And sometimes that shift doesn't come from where you expect. It comes from a conversation, a moment, a person the world overlooks, but who sees things clearly and reminds you of what matters. Samuel didn't ask for anything. He didn't try to change anyone. He just showed up as himself. And that changed everything. If this story meant something to you, if it made you think or feel or reflect on something in your own life, then don't keep it to yourself. Like this video, share it with someone who needs this reminder, and drop a comment saying real, because sometimes the smallest stories carry the biggest lessons. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Mr. George Stories, because this isn't just about storytelling. It's about truth, and there are more stories like this waiting to be told.